Middle of Nowhere, 2012, is a poignant middle-grade novel by Canadian author Caroline Adderson that delves into the realistic struggles faced by 12-year-old Curtis as he assumes responsibility for his younger brother, Artie, in the absence of their mother. When their mother fails to return home from work, Curtis, determined to protect Artie, confides in their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Burt. Sensing the urgency of the situation, Mrs. Burt takes the boys to her lakeside cabin, providing them a refuge away from the prying eyes of social services. While Artie finds solace and connection with Mrs. Burt, Curtis wrestles with his diminishing faith in his mother's return. In Middle of Nowhere, Adderson skillfully explores themes of familial relationships, abandonment, and the significance of trust. The novel received critical acclaim, earning recognition as the recipient of the Shalia A. Goff Children's Literature Prize and being selected as an OLA Best Bet in 2012. The story unfolds through the perspective of Curtis, who holds an unwavering belief that his mother would never leave him again. Yet, Curtis's past experience of being left behind during kindergarten resurfaces, when his mother prioritized her then-boyfriend over her responsibilities. This resulted in Curtis enduring abuse in a foster home, inflicted by his foster brother, Brandon Pennypacker. However, Curtis's mother worked tirelessly to regain custody, assuring him that she would never abandon him again. Curtis clings to this promise, cherishing a sentimental memento, a baby tooth he lost during his time with the Pennypackers, as a testament to their bond. Despite their challenging circumstances, Curtis's mother endeavors to improve their lives. She works a night job at a local gas station while pursuing her education to obtain a high school equivalency degree, aspiring to become a nurse. Curtis wholeheartedly trusts his mother's unwavering commitment to their well-being. Nevertheless, as days turn into weeks without his mother's return, Curtis's confidence gradually erodes. He and Artie continue attending school, but their teachers grow concerned, sensing that something may be amiss at home. Curtis grapples with phone calls from his mother's employer, who ultimately fires her due to her prolonged absence. Additionally, their landlord demands payment for rent, further exacerbating their predicament. Running low on food, Curtis resorts to using his mother's credit card to purchase groceries until it reaches its limit. Curtis understands the gravity of keeping his mother's disappearance a secret to prevent him and Artie from being separated and placed in foster care. Across the street, Mrs. Burt, an energetic elderly woman with white hair, hires Curtis to assist her with various tasks. Due to a recent accident, Mrs. Burt now relies on a walker and struggles to manage things on her own. She fears that her lawyer daughter, Marianne, will insist on moving her to a retirement community. Over time, Curtis develops trust in Mrs. Burt and confides in her about their predicament. Mrs. Burt becomes an invaluable source of support, helping them navigate their mother's mounting bills and preparing delicious meals for them. One day, when they witness the police entering Curtis's apartment, he worries that they will face eviction and be placed in foster care. Sensing the urgency, Mrs. Burt proposes that the boys move in with her to avoid drawing further attention. Curtis agrees, and to ensure his mother receives the message, he leaves a note in the box containing his cherished baby tooth. The remote wilderness cabin owned by Mrs. Burt becomes their sanctuary as they abscond together. Although the cabin is worn and damaged by squirrels, the boys clean it out and embark on an unforgettable summer. They learn to fish, build bonfires, construct an outhouse, and chop wood. They revel in swimming in the lake and find joy in their newfound life with Mrs. Burt, who showers them with love and attention. She regales them with stories, sings alongside them, and fulfills their every desire. During their time in the cabin, Artie gradually overcomes his fears, even conquering his fear of falling into the toilet. He forms a close bond with Mrs. Burt and seems to momentarily forget about their mother. However, whenever Curtis engages in activities such as fishing, picking blueberries, or swimming, his worries about his mother resurface. Attempting to provide some solace, Mrs. Burt shares that her own son, Clyde, tragically drowned in the lake years ago. Curtis begins to suspect that Mrs. Burt may be poisoning Artie's perception of their mother, but Mrs. Burt explains that she is simply trying to help him cope with the loss. Initially, Curtis harbors anger towards Mrs. Burt, but he eventually recognizes the validity of her perspective. As he realizes the burden of his worries lifting, Curtis undergoes a shift in attitude. However, when he discovers Mrs. Burt's intention to spend the winter in the cabin, suspicion creeps into his mind. Concerned about their situation, Curtis suggests informing social services that the boys want to reside with Mrs. Burt. Disappointingly, Mrs. Burt refuses, believing that authorities would never allow an elderly person like her to care for the boys. She also insists that formal schooling is unnecessary and declares her intent to educate them herself. Despite Curtis's growing fear, Mrs. Burt adamantly refuses to return to the city, further intensifying his worries. Determined to find a way to escape their predicament, Curtis begins contemplating various strategies. In a moment of emotional outburst, Mrs. Burt reluctantly agrees to take them back to their home. However, tragedy strikes as she suffers a stroke. Displaying courage, Curtis braves the frigid lake waters and swims to seek help from their closest neighbor, Mr. Monroe. With urgency, Curtis recounts the entire story to Mrs. Burt's daughter, Mary Ann, in a hotel room across from the hospital. Mary Ann expresses apologies for her mother's behavior. Curtis and Artie experience immense joy when they are happily reunited with their mother. They discover that she had been involved in a car accident on her way to work, resulting in a crushed leg and a coma. As soon as she regained consciousness, her immediate concern was the whereabouts of her children. Curtis learns that Mrs. Burt had been aware of their mother's hospitalization, yet he does not harbor any resentment towards her. Recognizing the assistance they received from Mrs. Burt, Curtis visits her in the hospital, understanding that they can now reciprocate by aiding in her recovery from the stroke. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.